Back to our lead story, day one of the 6-week strict lockdown in Melbourne and declaration of a state of disaster in Victoria. The new rules include an evening curfew. Victoria is going hard, if not that early, and will it be hard enough? Epidemiologist Professor Tony Blakely is in lockdown in Melbourne and joins us now. Good morning.
Morena.
Is this the right measure?
Yes, it is. A little bit overdue. It would have been great if we'd done this from the beginning of our initial 6-week lockdown and gone hard early, as you were saying. The reason that we're having to do it now is the numbers are staying high, and they're staying high. I've been careful not to get stuck into individuals who are misbehaving, but frankly, there's a lot of complacency out there. We had a quarter of all people who should be in isolation when they were visited last week were not at home. And so the Chief Health Officer here has used the term even shock and awe. Basically, this just has to be a shake-up to turn these numbers around, so that's what we're doing.
I have seen it described in Australian media as a New Zealand-style lockdown, but it's not quite as strong from what I can see. I mean, you'll still be able to get takeaways, and workplaces, it's still unclear.
Yeah, it's not far off though. So everybody asks me this question as a Kiwi myself, where are we at? And it's actually going to be closer to stage 4 than stage 3 or level 4 than level 3. You're right, the differences are that there'll still be takeaway, but they'll be under very strict conditions of contactless engagement, no changing of cash, no touching, la-da-da, that sort of thing. The workplaces, will be finding out more about that today. They're going to be broken into 3 tiers. That'll be the essential ones, like the healthcare services, so that'll be the same as what level 4 was in New Zealand. Then there'll be a bunch that are shut, like your footwear shops and your retail. I imagine there'll be a lot in that category. And then the main difference is there'll be a middle tier, which is yet to be announced, that will have restricted hours or other restrictions on opening trading practices we're yet to hear. So that'll be the key difference, is that there'll be some sort of partial opening of some services.
Right. Does this show that trying to stamp out outbreaks using postal code, hotspot lockdowns, masks, these other mechanisms are futile, and that if New Zealand was to have an outbreak, it would be risky to not go hard straight away again?
Okay, this is a really important question. On the mask side, they are effective. We know that from both evidence of individuals followed up, cohort studies, some randomised trials. They reduce transmission by up to 80%, maybe not as much in the real world. So they're effective. But the hotspots one is something I've certainly moved my position on in the last week or so. So, for example, when Queensland tries to stop people coming in from New South Wales from hotspots, they're easily evaded. So somebody could slip up to their parents' place in the rural area of New South Wales, then jump across the border. That's the first thing, is that we have to allow for people behaving badly, unfortunately. The second thing is the virus is always ahead of you. So if you, in the Melbourne situation, when we locked down 10, then 12 postcodes, yes, the numbers were high there, but of course, they were also starting to go up in the areas outside of the hotspots, because the virus is always a week or 2 ahead of you. So back to the New Zealand circumstance, if you had a leakage from quarantine, I certainly hope you don't, you would want to have a very wide hotspot. So if there was one leakage into Auckland, you'd probably put into, say, a level 3 lockdown, half of Auckland or all of Auckland. You need to have a very wide geographic range to get ahead of the virus.
And is that also because you need to be able to control who's going in and out of those hotspots with some ease?
Yeah, both the fact that the virus may have already jumped out of the identifiable hotspot and be spreading silently, but also because of the travel. Unless you put a really hard ring fence around with, military and police, completely sealing off a suburb, Chartwell and Hamilton or whatever it is, yeah, you have to have extraordinary measures. So the hotspot strategy is looking not that great. So, for example, in Australia, Clyde Palmer took a case against WA about their border closures, and a lot of the case was about using hotspots and measures like that. And I just think the hotspot measure doesn't work particularly well. You might as well use your state, or in New Zealand's case, your national or urban boundaries, and go wide if you have to do a hotspot strategy.
Why has the contact tracing failed as well? Is it just simply too many? And does that give us some lessons as well about when you reach a tipping point, it's too many to trace?
Okay, there's a couple of points in here. First of all, in the first lockdown, when you guys were going hard, we were going soft, we actually built up all our contact tracing. And the idea is it would deal with any outbreak, and we had the leakage from quarantine. It clearly failed. We could not get ahead of the virus. That was what would happen in the last few months. As far as what's happening now, the contact tracing in Victoria, at least, can handle about 200 cases a day. So we're well in excess of that. So they're just not keeping up anymore. And that means that we're getting more and more of the cases of community transmission, the mystery cases, as Premier Andrews calls them, the ones where you don't know where it came from. We're well over 50 a day of those. So we've lost control with the contact tracing, and therefore we need a stage 4 sort of lockdown to get us back down to numbers.
And having fancy apps and things, does that make any difference?
Oh, it's proved to be hopeless, unfortunately. So we built the COVID Safe app. Hasn't really worked at all. As best we can tell, hasn't assisted contact tracing teams much. I noticed the UK I think they've now abandoned their bespoke building of an app and now looking to use either a Google or Apple app. This is something that Australia needs to look at seriously, because there's good research showing that a well-functioning app will help your contact tracing. You need every bit of help you can get, but we don't have one yet here.
Do you have a figure now that you think if New Zealand was to have an outbreak, if we can contain it under, say, 100, we would be able to manage it, try and contact trace? Or is there a tipping point figure that you've formulated from what you've seen now?
Well, small is better. I wouldn't really want 100 if I was in New Zealand in the state you're at. And there's a lot of luck. The virus has a mind of its own, or stochastic, if you like. So, for example, in the quarantine leakage here, it first went out through some security guards and happened to get to a couple of super spreaders early on, and that type of bad luck early on can just tip you right over the edge. 100, I'm not sure what the contact tracing size is in New Zealand, but 100 would probably be something the contact tracing workforce in New Zealand could cope with. But
yes, it can, yep.
Yeah, but there's no way that you can be confident with 100 that you'll get on top of it, because if